Good afternoon and welcome everybody. The participants are slowly pouring in to our Zoom virtual room, and I can already see that we're welcoming a very diverse group of people. So we're all very excited to be here. My name is Zainab Malik, and I'm a program development specialist at the International Development Law Organization, IDLO. And I'm very pleased to be moderating this session on justice for women, legal empowerment, and social accountability. It's been a great 2 days of the 2020 annual Knowledge Platform Conference. And we have the privileged position of being the last session, well, one of the last 2 sessions, which means that we are welcoming you here while your motivation is high and your creative juices are flowing. So welcome. As I said, the session focuses on justice for women. Now, as with all discussions on justice, the conversation on justice for women cannot be had without discussing first injustice. Globally, women face persistent gaps between the promise of justice and realities in their communities, in the workplace, and in their homes. For example, 1 in 3 women experience violence at the hands of an intimate partner in their lifetimes. In majority of the world's countries, only 1/8 of the land ownership rests in the hands of women. In 57 countries, women do not have the same rights as men to become legal guardians in the event of a divorce. This is only a small snapshot of the justice challenges that face women all over the world. The current COVID-19 pandemic has worsened these justice challenges. Globally, we see a rise in the rates of gender-based violence, and this is only worsened by the fact that the capacity of the justice sector is reduced to provide appropriate remedies and redress. Yes, the reality is grim, but we are also standing now at a watershed moment in our movement for gender equality. Global, national, and local organizing through movements such as Me Too, She Decides, and with the women's marches means that finally the world is listening. And most importantly, the inclusion of a standalone commitment on gender equality, SDG 5, and a commitment on peaceful, inclusive, and just societies, SDG 16, in the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals means that finally there is a global recognition that there is no justice without justice for women. The momentum of these global commitments provides gender champions, such as a lot of you here, with the momentum to finally move the conversation to focusing on injustice, to focusing on solutions. And this is why we're here today. In 2016, IDLO blended elements of legal empowerment and social accountability approaches in a unique and innovative framework. This integrated approach was piloted in a project known as the DREAMS Project, which aimed to strengthen the capacity of adolescent girls and young women and their communities to hold service providers accountable for the delivery of quality HIV-related services in the countries of Uganda and Tanzania. Today, in this session, we've convened the research, programming, implementing teams that worked on the projects. Our esteemed panel will take us on the journey of highlighting the lessons learned, the challenges, and most importantly, the impact of implementing this approach to the DREAMS project. And then, through the help of all of you here, we hope to understand how this approach can be replicated and also scaled up to address the challenges in the field of justice for women. Great. So before we can embark on this journey, some housekeeping rules that I need to explain. So if you look at the the chat function, which I am also opening. Oops. Sorry, can we get? Yeah, you will see a link for something called the Jamboard. Now we are hoping for an active and interactive session. So we encourage you to remain engaged through the Jamboard while our speakers are speaking. Now the Jamboard allows you to anonymously post questions, ideas, and comments during the presentation as well. And after each of the presentations, we have built in a time of 5 minutes to take some of the questions from the Jamboard and refer them back to the speakers. Now, I will give a short demo on how we can use this tool. Great. So if you look at your screens, you can see the Jamboard. Now, the way it works is if you take your cursor to the sidebar and click on sticky notes, write your question, pick your favorite color, and press save. And then there you go. So there. So now you can put it there. And you can also edit, duplicate, and delete. So I hope that you will remain engaged throughout the session through the using of this tool. So the format of the session is as follows. We will first have 4 presenters who will provide us with different perspectives on the integrated legal empowerment and social accountability approach. In between each of these presentations, we have 5 to 10 minutes where we'll be taking questions from the Jamboard. After the presentations are over, we will open it up to the audience to pitch their experiences using either the integrated LESA approach or the legal empowerment and social accountability approaches. With this, we are coming to the start of our session, and I'm very pleased to welcome our first speaker. Our first speaker is Ms. Raffaella Pizzamiglio. Raffaella is a research specialist at the International Development Law Organization. Since 2015, Raffaella has been conducting empirical and desk research to support evidence-based policy, advocacy, and programming with a focus on human rights, the rule of law, facilitating access to justice in fragile and conflict settings, and of course, in the advancement of gender equality. Raffaella supported the integrated LESA approach that we're here to discuss today through research in program design and implementation by collecting secondary and primary data throughout the project cycle. Welcome, Raffaella, and we look forward to hearing about your journey and how you unpacked the legal empowerment and social accountability approaches only to bring them together into the new integrated approach. Over to you.
Thanks, Zainab, for the perfect introduction, and welcome everyone. So in this brief session, I will try to walk us through understanding the rationale and objectives of legal empowerment and social accountability as separate approaches, but also we will explore the synergies and how one approach can reinforce the other when used together. So we have 2 definitions here. Legal empowerment is a notion that will be familiar with the majority of our audience. This is a definition by the Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor. Social accountability perhaps might be a concept that is slightly less familiar to human rights practitioners in particular. This is a definition by the World Bank that defines it as a set of multiple mechanisms aiming to build accountability structures through civic engagement, and so through the engagement of ordinary citizens and civil society organizations in directly exacting accountability. These approaches have evolved separately, but they share common aims and overriding principles. They both promote a rights-based approach, and they have a bottom-up viewpoint. They rely on capacity enhancement of both service providers and users individuals and communities, and they seek to influence high-level decision-making, but through the use of different tools and strategies. And globally, they have been successfully integrated in health programming in particular, with the aim to address the limitations of individual approaches. We will launch a polling question, I think, which will be open for 1 minute, through which you can tell us your experience, if you have had experience integrating legal empowerment and social accountability, or if you've had experience implementing either of these approaches separately. As regards legal empowerment, briefly, so the elements of legal empowerment are grounded in the spirit of international human rights law, and on the principle of equality and dignity and rights of all human beings in particular. Its main goal is to ensure that all individuals and marginalized people particularly can understand and make use of legal frameworks to protect their rights and advance their interests. Legal empowerment programming requires a multifaceted approach, and it often combines different tools in a flexible manner. Generally, awareness raising and legal literacy activities are combined with the use of formal and informal justice avenues. The next slide provides an overview of the main legal empowerment strategies and tools available in practice. And so we can see that these are generally grouped in 3 overarching strategies. And so awareness raising interventions, which range from multimedia campaigns to community engagement, dispute resolution and redress interventions, which are aimed at practically addressing barriers faced by individuals when they want to access justice. These may be costs of proceedings, lack of court capacity, any legal and administrative barriers, and structural policy and legal reform interventions, which are aimed at pursuing high-level systemic changes. For example, through engaging with government at different levels, strategic litigation, civic mobilization strategies. So this was briefly an overview of the rationale and objectives. Moving on to the next slide, we have a visual that shows the social accountability process. And so social accountability is a concept that is derived from accountability in a traditional sense. And accountability is also a human rights principle, which refers to the obligation of power holders to account for or take responsibility for their actions, particularly in relation to their adherence to laws and standards. However, checks and balances instituted by state authorities to ensure accountability are sometimes insufficient, and marginalized individuals in particular lack information or access to channels where they can voice their grievances with service providers and government. In response to these challenges, social accountability approaches tend to operate from the bottom up. And so, as we can see in the visual, the assumption behind social accountability programming is that by increasing users' access to information on their rights and service performance, and increasing their opportunity to act on this information, this will result in their exercise of choice with regards to which services to use. Increase in voice in decision-making about service delivery priorities, and in oversight by users of service delivery in relation to respect for norms and standards. And this leads to an increase in accountability and ultimately to more effective public policies and service delivery. In the next slide, we see the range of social accountability programming entry points that exist, and it's important to note that social accountability programming may involve multiple approaches and tools, ranging from confrontational in nature to more collaborative. These can be used and combined depending on what needs to be changed, who is accountable, what opportunities exist to engage with government in your context of operation, and of course your organizational capacity and resources. Social accountability tools and strategies are normally discussed in two broad categories: information interventions and grievance redress interventions. These build on each other a little bit, and information interventions usually start by creating an information base through data collection from service users, service providers, and they aim to make information accessible, so understandable by everyone. And this is the basis for strategies that involve participatory monitoring of use of resources and access to entitlements, our second category. These may involve activities such as the community scorecard or social auditing that allow service beneficiaries and service providers to identify the problems that they intend to solve and come up with an appropriate strategy based on context-specific realities. And these can be repeated at regular intervals to track improvements in service delivery. Finally, grievance redress interventions often build on information interventions, and they can also be institutionalized over the long term, and they may involve the creation of community feedback and complaint mechanisms, and of strategies for civic mobilization and engagement with government through advocating and negotiating for change to address the issues identified. So examples of activities are listed here. We will come back to this later. Moving on to the next slide. Thanks. So we have observed so far that legal empowerment and social accountability share common aims, but they also have specific strengths, and these are listed here. As you can see, legal empowerment focuses on strengthening people's agency. It uses laws that protect the rights of the most vulnerable. Another strength of legal empowerment is that it can respond to a variety of justice mechanisms, including community-based mechanisms, such as paralegals and and customary justice actors, which are preferred by many poor and marginalized individuals globally. Social accountability enables the gathering of credible data, as we noted, and presents it in a simple and accessible manner. It facilitates participatory identification of problems related to service delivery, and it enables agreements over solutions and priorities. However, these individual strengths are also accompanied by certain limitations, which we have listed in the next slide. And so while social accountability approaches can help collective identification of problems, they often fail to consider the specific interests and needs of vulnerable and marginalized individuals. And they may not result in the issues identified being actually addressed. And legal empowerment can complement these gaps by removing barriers to redress and access to justice in individual and collective cases, and by focusing on the rights of marginalized groups. Legal empowerment also has certain limitations, in particular strategies such as judicial precedent setting, communication campaigns. They can promote structural reform, but they're always contingent on individual or community initiatives. and moreover, monitoring the long-term impact of legal empowerment strategies has proven difficult. And social accountability tools such as community scorecards allow the institutionalization of long-term monitoring, and other mechanisms such as grievance redress mechanisms, feedback mechanisms. They enable continuous feedback channels between service providers and beneficiaries, ultimately leading to improved service quality. So the core commonalities of legal empowerment and social accountability and the ways in which their individual limitations can be addressed through integration provide important insights for program design and programming focused on justice for women and girls in particular. And as my colleagues will explain in the rest of the session, IDLO adopted a careful strategy of integrating legal empowerment and social accountability from the earliest stages of the programming cycle and throughout implementation and monitoring, building on targeted capacity building of multiple actors and using a phased adaptive process. I think we can perhaps move to the next slide, which provides a summary of the entry points and existing tools, and I will leave the floor to Zainab.
Thank you, Raffaella. Thank you very much for providing us with this informative overview of both the legal empowerment and social accountability approaches and helping us unpack the various elements, but also helping us understand how these approaches can be blended together to create an innovative and unique approach to programming called the Integrated Legal Empowerment and Social Accountability Approach. Now, before we move on to from research to programs, first, I would like to welcome a lot of participants who have joined us following the beginning of Raffaella's presentation. So, welcome, I see. And if you feel comfortable, please do turn on your camera so we can see you and allow for a more interactive experience throughout this session. And I also want to draw people's attention to the Jamboard that we will be using throughout the session. So the Jamboard can be accessed through the link that's been provided to you in the chat. So please feel free to enter the Jamboard and put up your responses and reactions during the presentations. And we built in 5 minutes after each of the presentations to take your reactions and convey them to the speakers. Great. So before we move on to the next presentation, Raffaella, I wanted to ask you, you've explained to us the different elements of the integrated approach, but what elements of this approach, in your opinion, make it suitable to addressing the justice challenges for women and girls?
Thanks for the question, Zainab. And just noting that I'm seeing from the polling results that actually a majority of the audience has used the integrated approach. And so we have an expert audience here. Please feel free to contribute and post any comments in the chat or the Jamboard. And coming back to your question, so I would say, based on the lessons from IDLO's Dreams project, I think the LESA approach in that context enabled the direct involvement of beneficiaries, which were adolescent girls and young women, in implementation of activities targeting their peers. And so certain groups of adolescent girls were directly involved in awareness raising, legal aid activities, and outreach for their peers, and through a couple of hundreds girls involved, the project was able to reach several thousand in the 4 targeted districts. So this was an important part of it. And secondly, I think the LESA approach in particular, in its sequencing, the way it was designed for the DREAMS project, it included a lot of activities in which beneficiaries were directly interacting with other constituencies. And so from the very beginning of implementation, girls were involved in dialogues and interactions with service providers. Healthcare workers, but also police officers, also local government representatives. And so building on these first interactions, it was then possible to have successful social accountability activities, such as the community scorecards, because the girls were already used to addressing certain issues with service providers, talking about HIV, and even directly interacting with certain community actors that they would normally be reluctant to do so. And so I think in this case, the sequencing of and merging of different activities was particularly effective with women and girls in particular.
Great. Thank you so much, Raffaella, for that detailed response. And I think that you've really done my job for me by providing a great sneak peek into our next presentation. So next, I'm very pleased to welcome Belice Odamna from our IDLO country office in Kenya. Belice will be looking at the specific application of the integrated legal empowerment and social accountability approach in the DREAMS project. Belice is a lawyer and a health rights advocate with over a decade of experience implementing programs on the right to health and HIV. She has hands-on experience at the community, national, and international levels on advocacy and litigation on socio-economic and political issues that affect the promotion and protection of the right to health. And currently, she is serving as the legal advisor for health at IDLO. Welcome, Belice, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Zainab. So my role this afternoon is to introduce IDLO's pilot project, which was implemented using the legal empowerment and social accountability approach that has been described ably by the first speaker. So the project was titled Integrating Legal Empowerment and Social Accountability for Quality HIV Services for Adolescent Girls and Young Women. This was implemented between 2016 and 2018 in Tanzania and Uganda. Later in this session, you will hear from colleagues at the Legal and Human Rights Center in Tanzania and the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development in Uganda, the civil society organizations which IDLO partnered with to implement this particular project. So by way of background, the project was part of the larger DREAMS partnership, which was announced by PEPFAR on World AIDS Day in 2014 as a public-private partnership, which included, among others, the VIV Healthcare Foundation, which funded IDLO's project. For those not conversant with the DREAMS project, DREAMS is an acronym for Determined, Resilient, Empowered, AIDS-Free, Mentored, and Safe Girls. So I will go into the goal of the project, which was to strengthen the capacity of communities to hold service providers accountable for improved and quality HIV prevention services to the adolescent girls and young women. Now, I will highlight the 3 broad problems the project sought to address. The first one was the systemic inequalities and obstacles to HIV prevention services and gender-based violence aftercare services faced by adolescent girls and young women. Second were the legal and social drivers that affect adolescent girls and young women and their communities' behavior and decisions in holding HIV and health service providers and justice actors accountable. And thirdly, the lack of capacity, including legal capacity and tools that are useful in holding service providers accountable. So we responded to the three broad problems using the following four interventions. First, we built the capacities of rights holders, who included the users of health and justice services on their entitlements based on law and the existing policy and legal processes available to address their needs. Secondly, we empowered duty bearers, healthcare workers, and justice sector actors, including the police, members of the judiciary, probation officers, prosecutors, and lawyers with skills and tools to actualize the entitlements and rights owed to the rights holders. So these two foregoing interventions are particularly important as empowering the rights holders made them aware, and using that knowledge, they were able to hold the duty bearers accountable. On the converse, it is important that duty bearers are equipped with knowledge and skills to be able to actualize rights and entitlements owed to the rights holders. So the third intervention was we worked with communities to strengthen the use of a rights-based local engagement and feedback process to improve HIV prevention and GBV-related service delivery. Using the community scorecard process described previously, community members and adolescent girls and young women were able to identify key areas for improvement in service delivery. Some of the areas they were able to identify were long waiting hours at health facilities for adolescent girls and young women, which affected timely delivery of services, in particular, those services that need timely intervention, like post-GBV care and support. Secondly, was the lack of PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, for instance, for those activities that put them at risk of infection. Lack of PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis for gender-based violence survivors, which must be taken within 72 hours of assault. What came out persistently in both Uganda and Tanzania was the attitude of healthcare workers and justice actors, which was described as judgmental. This meant that adolescent girls and young women shied away from the much needed HIV prevention services that they needed. Then we also identified incidences of corruption where service providers asked for payment for services that are supposed to be generally free. And we also saw that the link between health facilities, the police, and subsequently courts in GBV cases was weak. This caused delays in accessing post-GBV care and access to justice. So by way of dialogue, most of the above issues were resolved. The different service providers committed to change the way in which they provided services, especially after they understood how poor and uncoordinated service delivery negatively affected the adolescent girls and young women. Now, for issues that needed intervention of policymakers, these issues were presented at roundtable meetings and national dialogues for review and reform. My colleagues from LHRC and SEHUD will speak to some of the successes that came from this level of engagement. Now, finally, I would like to draw our attention to IDLO's Lessons Learned program, which has prepared a brief that details the lessons that we learned from implementing this project. Be sure to check IDLO's social media platforms and website on the 20th of October, that is next week, for a copy of the publication after its launch. Back to you, Zainab.
Thank you so much, Belice, for providing us with that overview of the implementation of the integrated approach in the DREAMS project. And as Belice mentioned, IDLO is launching next week on the 20th of October, our lessons learned brief which highlights the various key elements of the project, but also what the impact and the results that came out of it. If you would like to access the lessons learned brief before its launch, we can provide you with this opportunity. My colleague will be sharing a link for an embargoed copy in the chat. So you can use this link to get a sneak peek into the publication. Great. Thank you very much. And this provides us with a good opportunity to move from program design and program oversight into the implementation of the project. And Belice has already highlighted and showed to you some of the testimonies of the people who were working on the project on the ground. And on this note, I'm very excited to welcome Getrude Dyabene from the Legal and Human Rights Center in Uganda. Getrude is a Tanzanian advocate with experience in public policy, litigation, women, children, and persons with disability. She has experience in community mobilization and capacity building on human rights, women and children rights, and an understanding of HIV and law, legal practice, gender advocacy, and health and human rights in Tanzania. She is currently working at the Legal and Human Rights Center, LHRC, as a Women, Children, and Persons with Disabilities Program Officer. Welcome, Gertrude, and we're very happy that you can join us today.
Thank you so much, Zainab. I'm actually really excited to be in this session today. I know my colleagues Belice and Raffaella have explained actually about the project. The picture that you see on the screen is the picture of the empowered adolescent girls and young women who are empowered on their rights and to demand for HIV services and GBV protection. And those messages that they were showing to the actors so that they are demanding quality health rights together with protection from gender-based violence. The Legal and Human Rights Center implemented the project with the LESA approach, or the Legal Empowerment and Social Accountability, with which the adolescent girls and young women of ages 10 to 24 were the direct beneficiaries. And through the LESA strategies, we managed to popularize the HIV Prevention and Control Act, which actually was enacted in 2008. But the justice actors did not use, or I would rather say that didn't even know that the act was even available. So we managed to popularize it to the justice actors, and as a result, they started using the HIV Prevention and Control Act to make people accountable with the offense that are actually stipulated in the act. I remember there was a case in Kahama where a child was raped and also infected with HIV, but they did not charge the offender with the transmission, intentional HIV transmission, because they didn't know that offense even exists. And the second thing, we actually strengthened the cooperation between justice actors and the adolescent girls and young women and the communities, because by then the communities were even scared to access justice or to even go close to the justice systems. But then through the project and the integrating of LESA, we managed to empower them on their rights, and that the court is actually a public space for them to access anytime they want, and they receive service. And as a result, we managed to create a link between the adolescent girls and young women, the community, and the justice actors, meaning the police and the magistrates. And anytime that they will need services, they will receive help. But also the integration of LESA managed to change policy and legal reforms. After the enactment of the HIV Prevention and Control Act in 2008, there are no regulations made so far. So through the LESA, we managed to push for the enactment or the development of the regulation for the act. But we also managed to push for the amendment of the HIV Prevention and Control to allow self-testing, but to also allow HIV testing for ages from 15. Before that, it was stated that a 15-year-old girl or year-old person would only be tested for HIV with a parental or guardian permit. And then through the LESA, we also increased the understanding with which we got adolescent girls and young women champion who actually would go in communities to empower other girls on their rights on GBV and health services, but also they are light on issues of HIV, with which now it increased reporting of GBV cases to us, and we intervene immediately. But also we are actually using these girls as, I can say, community paralegals who actually assist when the legal issue is not too critical for us to intervene at the first stage. But also this project managed to empower the adolescent girls and young women to claim their rights, not only on HIV service delivery or protection from gender-based violence, but on other issues too, including their inclusion on so many issues from the community level to the national level. And there is a guideline on having, committee for children, and these adolescent girls and young women who are below 18 started to demand for them to be included in these committees, and also for the establishment of the children committees as per the regulation in 2010. But also the LESA approaches, or which we actually integrated in the project, strengthen the community actors, which I mean the village HIV committees, who were actually established as per the HIV Prevention and Control Act, but we are never empowered, and they did not even know their responsibility, and in such they could not work or actually assist their communities as it was supposed to be. But through the LESA, we revived these communities, we empowered them, and they started working and actually assisting their communities in actually ensuring that the community is HIV free, but also they are protected from GBV. And these communities also would report to the district, and then the issues would be taken to the national level and then will be implemented. And as I've said earlier, the change of HIV and AIDS Act, Prevention and Control Act, which was enacted, amended last year in 2019. And also through the LESA, with which the adolescent girls who are empowered, they are involved in community meetings. In the areas where the project was implemented, which is Shinyanga and Kahama, first is a place where women's rights are not taken priority. Like a woman or a girl would not stand a village community meeting and speak, and people would take her seriously. So through the LESA, we empower these girls to make them understand that they have the right to bring their issues and use the village or community platforms to bring their issues that they can be assisted. And so when girls would face any challenge that they are not allowed to speak, they will say that we are also allowed because we also have our issues. And this even pushed for the community to accept them, and they are now included and involved in community and village meetings, including also plans for, having the budgetary plans for themselves. This is the justice grievance chart, which we developed through the project, which actually are directing the GBV survivors to report from the police, to seek medical attention and to seek social services, but also on how their case is going to be, so that to empower them on the legal implication or the legal issue that they might face when they are victims or when they are assisting a victim or survivor of gender-based violence. But after the project ended, which was in 2018, in October, a Legal and Human Rights Center used to only apply legal empowerment, but we did not apply social accountability. But after the project, which actually integrated both the legal empowerment and social accountability, when it brought a lot of outcome and impact to the communities, the Legal and Human Rights Center, which was actually developing their 6-year strategic plan of 2019 to 2024, decided to adopt the legal empowerment and social accountability as a whole strategy. And now, in our 6-year strategic plan, we have a strategic objective number 4, which actually focuses on women, children, and persons with disabilities, where we have an outcome which actually focuses or uses the strategy of legal empowerment and social accountability. And the picture which was showed previous of women, those women were empowered on their rights, and you receive a lot of feedback from them after they empowered on their rights, after they empowered on where to seek help legally. The feedback come to us on how they get assisted and on how actually things have changed in the communities. Thank you so much. I will return this to Zainab. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Gertrude, for providing us with this unique perspective from the ground. And it's also really interesting to note that based on the successes of applying the integrated LESA approach to the DREAMS project, you've also integrated it into your strategic plan for the next 6 years. And definitely, I'm sure the audience would be interested in hearing some of your experiences on how you've been taking it forward. So I would like to take this moment to take a look at our Jamboard and see what kinds of reactions have come in from the audience. I can see that from Raluca, who is highlighting IDLO's Justice for Women report by saying that in at least 45 countries, legal aid contributed to women's empowerment and gender equality. So thank you for that reflection, Raluca. And based on the polling results that we saw earlier, a lot of our audience has a lot of extensive experience in applying legal empowerment to justice for women. So definitely we're looking forward to hearing your experiences when we open up for interventions and questions. I can see that there's also some questions that have come in. So I would also like to take this opportunity to direct these questions to Belice and Gertrude and Raffaella. So one of the questions that's come in is, were there sustainability challenges you faced in relation to the LESA approach, and how did you address them? So I believe this question can be answered by either Belice or Gertrude. You have the floor.
Okay, I can go first. For us, first, the sustainability, when we decide to adopt it, that's one of we wanted to sustain the project, but also we still empower the adolescent girls and young women who actually are directly empowered by us, for them to be registered as paralegals, because Legal and Human Rights Center have paralegals all over Tanzania, and we also have monitors. So we continue to empower the adolescent girls and young women who are directly empowered through the project to become registered paralegals as per the Legal Aid Act, so that we can still and continue to use them. And up to now, we still use them. They report GBV cases to us. We still continue to empower them and strengthen them, and still, like in Shinyanga now, they are registering their paralegal unit. Thank you.
So in addition to what Getrude said, for us at IDLO, the issue of sustainability was in the design of the project, such that one of the things that the project did was to really do a huge knowledge transfer from IDLO as an intergovernmental organization to local civil society organizations now, like LHRC and SEHUD, who have taken forward the work and the concept around legal empowerment and social accountability. And as you have heard from Getrude, they've been able to replicate it and even include it in their strategic plan. But also one thing that we did during the project is that we provided technical support to the implementing partners, and in turn, that is SEHUD and LHRC. And what they did is that they also worked with community-based organizations who can be able to carry forward the work even at the end of the project. And as Getrude has said, there have been successes even after the end of the project. And as probably Nakibuuka, the next speaker, will speak to how they've been able to also deal with issues of sustainability in Uganda. So back to you, Zainab.
Great, thank you very much. And I am mindful of the time, but I also want to give an opportunity to some of the other questions that have come in. So very quickly, if Belice, you could answer this question. How did you get issues identified to the community scorecard to be addressed at the policy level?
So what we did with that is that at the community level, during the community feedback process using the community scorecard, each community in each district developed a community action plan together with which included what needed to be done and by who, and they even gave themselves timelines. So some of them included them reaching out to their members of parliament, them reaching out to the regional commandant of police, them reaching out to the judge in charge of high court station or the executive officer of a court station. So community members specifically reached out and even wrote petitions to these particular policy makers, and then these policy makers now had to take up these issues and address them. There were some issues that really did not need policymakers to work on them, but needed issues around attitude change, for example, amongst service providers. Those were addressed at the community level, but those that actually needed policymakers to make a change or do an executive order or come up with a change in law or policy, those are the ones that then were referred to either the legislators or those in charge of the different regions within the country.
Thank you so much. And before we move on to this next speaker, I would like to point out that this is the last presentation, and after this, we will be opening up to the general audience to share their experiences and interventions. And to facilitate this, we are also now opening our chat. So now you can also take an opportunity to post your reflections on the chat or continue posting on the Jamboard, as I can see a lot of you have been doing so. Great. So now, moving from the DREAMS project to the replication of the integrated LESA approach, I am very pleased to welcome our next speaker from Uganda, Ms. Noor Nakibuuka Musisi. Nakibuuka is the Director of Programs at the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development, CHUD. She is a lawyer with special interest in health and related human rights. She has over 10 years of experience in programs and project management, research, community empowerment, litigation, and advocacy for health rights-related cases. This includes sexual and reproductive health rights cases, coalition building, and trainings. Thank you very much for joining us, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much. The introduction of myself is already done by Zainab. So at the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development, which is an indigenous organization operating in Uganda, our major role is to use the law to advance the realization of the right to health in Uganda, but also make sure that the approaches we use are actually replicated in countries in the East African region. So we implemented the DREAMS project together with the Tanzanian team with support from IDLO and Viv Healthcare. And from this project, it's been replicated in other districts. The project was implemented in Gomba and Mukono districts. But at the moment, we are having a seemingly similar project that uses the same approaches of legal empowerment and social accountability. And we are now looking at it from the angle of addressing sexual and gender-based violence in Hoima district. We took on the approach because, number one, that approach merged together of legal empowerment and social accountability empowers the duty bearers and the rights holders at the same time. So the balancing of the equation of the empowered duty bearers and the empowered rights holders makes it a bit important for each other to hold, for the duty bearers, so the rights holders to hold the duty bearers accountable. So before we conducted this approach in Hoima, we conducted a baseline survey before the implementation, and we realized that when it comes to access to justice, it was actually a challenge in the district. We realized or found out that cases were settled at the community level, and throughout the research, there was no mention of the word court. All the conversations stopped at the police level. And throughout the survey, it was very clear that sexual abuse and access to justice for girls and women was very difficult because the services were not going beyond the police stations. So we employed the LESA methodology, and this was drawing lessons from the DREAMS project that has been discussed by Belice and Getrude. So the approach was applied in a program design implementation, and I want to take the time to explain to you how it was applied. The rights enhancement that we did, which is a legal empowerment approach, led to the signing and development of petitions, which is a social accountability approach that led to a commitment by the duty bearers to develop a bylaw in the district of Hoima on child protection. To us, this is still in progress, but the mere fact that the duty bearers are in position to pick up the need to develop a bylaw is a key important factor that we pull out. Then we had rights enhancement again, which is a legal empowerment approach, and held dialogues, which is a social accountability approach. And the combination of these led to a number of cases on sexual abuse being reported to courts of law. As we speak, we have more than 11 cases being followed up in courts of law. Please be notified that before the approaches were applied in Hoima, all cases were stopping at the police level. Then rights awareness, which we are still conducting, which is a legal empowerment approach, and the district dialogues that were held, which is a social accountability approach, resulted into securing land for construction of a port in Gomba. Now this is with the Dreams project. And as we speak, communities in Gomba can no longer walk the 40 kilometers to access justice. At least we are sure that with the availability of the land, access to justice will be at the doorstep of the communities in Gomba. Again, in Hoima, we have been able to reach out to over 3,150 people with legal information and access to justice using the approach through the various dialogues that are being held. Next slide, please. In terms of litigation and the dialogues combined, in Hoima, we have seen cases opened up against the police officers who should be duty bearers upholding rights, but this time around, they're the ones that are being held and put in custody for intermingling with the cases of sexual and gender-based violence. And all this is coming out of the empowerments and the dialogues that we've given to the communities. Further, we have held capacity building sessions, which is a social accountability approach, merged with rights enhancement, which is a legal empowerment approach. And this led to the district council initiating the process of finalizing the development of the ordinance on child protection. In addition, there's been rights enhancement, which is an LE approach, and scorecards usage, which is a social accountability approach. And these two have been used to measure the level of performance of service delivery and access to justice within the districts of both Hoima and Gomba. In Gomba district, for example, the access road from the main district trading center to the farthest sub-county, which harbors a lake, and Mamba Health Center, 3 were upgraded out of the 2 approaches that were combined. So if you asked us what the future is as an institution for these particular 2 approaches, one, we think about scaling up the LESA methodology as a top priority in the districts where we are working. One of the things that we have thought about is actually to employ this approach combined, because we have realized that it brings about results. In addition, we think that information about this particular approach is not available. So we are trying to scale up the documentation as a knowledge product out of these 2 approaches and projects. While using the legal empowerment and social accountability approaches, they come with challenges. First, in the communities where we are, expectations are usually high. To the organizations that do needs-based approaches, you realize that communities come in handy. But when you come with legal empowerment and social accountability, which is really to kind of raise people's awareness and be able to hold duty bearers accountable, this is what people don't prefer sometimes. They prefer tangible products out of approaches, and this is a challenge for the legal empowerment and social accountability approach. In addition, Uganda is undergoing leadership changes. We are undertaking elections, and the changes with leadership affect the results. For example, while Hoima is progressing, we are very aware that the political environment is no longer enabling for that because of the upcoming elections, and the results of the approach are most likely going to be affected. In addition, the trickle down of information and knowledge from individuals who participated directly in the capacity building trainings to those who do not, but sometimes get information from others, is sometimes not effective because this is information provided by third parties. And lastly, With the approach, a number of cases usually get to court, but litigation and follow-up of cases is time and resource consuming, and usually budgets for litigation and minimum for such projects. Yes, cases received must be followed up to the end of the project and beyond. So this one becomes sometimes very difficult follow-up cases that are initiated and cannot be litigated because projects have ended. Thank you so much. Back to you, Zainab.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much. It's really interesting to see how the LESA approach was replicated by CHERT in this project to address SGBV. So we can already start getting an idea of how the approach can be scaled up to address the challenges for justice for women. And this brings us to the end of our presentations. And now I would like to open up the floor to our participants. And if you would like to share your experiences, you can either do that through our chat function, or you can raise your hand, and if you would like to make an intervention. But please limit yourself to 2 minutes. And while we wait for you to do that, I will turn my attention to the Jamboard again, because I can see that some of the reactions are already starting to come in. One of the questions, and this is actually a really interesting question that we received from our participants, is that how are the inequalities within the communities addressed in the integrated LESA approach? And since these approaches rely on community participation, how can we ensure that they do not reproduce these inequalities? So I would like to invite our panel, and maybe Nakibuuka, we can start with you.
Thank you so much. Love the question. So one, I think I'll respond to the question on how inequalities are addressed in the communities. Just like previous speakers indicated, the legal empowerment and social accountability approach comes with empowerment of the communities as well as the duty bearers. So you're actually empowering the communities to be able to hold the duty bearers accountable. In one way or another, you're educating them about how to access justice, from who, what are the approaches, how to access services. So the moment they get the information, they're in position to follow up and access the services in one way or another. If they cannot directly access, you already empowered them through the dialogues on how to access justice through the courts of law. So ideally, the inequalities are addressed through the information that is provided with very specific lineup of what the process is for one to access justice. And I think for us, I would just give an example of what we have seen. In one of the interventions, we got hold of a 16-year-old who was defiled by one of the duty bearers. So at the end of the day, the 16-year-old was bounced between families because the duty bearer is a Uganda police person who is known and cannot be held by anyone. So all the relatives that were actually harboring this girl were threatened. At the end of the day, during the interventions, we asked ourselves questions. She was empowered, she knew what to do, but the person who is supposed to be protecting her was actually threatening everybody. So the first thing we thought about was to get a shelter for her. When we got her in a shelter as we speak, the police person is in the cells because this girl is in position to now come out and give evidence against the person who was abusing her, because there's no fear and the girl is empowered and can stand before the courts of law. So one of the things that we want to think about this approach is the fact that the communities get empowered onto what procedures are there for them to actually do in case they face any inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe, looking at our chat, there is a question especially for you, Nakibuuka, which is related to the response that you just gave. So this question is from Angus Kelly from the Irish Rule of Law International. And she's asking, when you say intermingling of cases by police officers, what do you mean?
Thank you so much. I'm very certain that we all know what police does when cases get to police. I earlier indicated that in Hoima, most of the cases were actually stopping at the police level. So what police does is to actually come in with levels of corruption. For the many cases that interfaced with and Sehud has handled, for example, you find that there is some bit of under-table corruption that happens. Either police intermingles with the families that have come to report or the families of the suspects. So when I say intermingling of cases by police, I actually mean that there's exchange of money for the cases to stop at that level. And as we speak in Hoima, we have police officers who have been put behind the bars because of that particular thing of intermingling of the cases, of exchange of money to actually take away the police files. And then at the end of the day, the girls that have come to report do not access the justice. So the law is very clear and nobody in Uganda is above the law. And we are very excited that this approach actually does empower the duty bearers, but also the rights holders, so they know what to do and how to go about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe that I saw a hand up, and see, it's Reluka. Reluka, did you raise your hand, and would you like to share your insights into the integrated LESA approach?
Hi, Zainab, and hello, everyone. I didn't, but I'm happy to contribute. But first of all, I think Samira was the one raising her hand. I see. So I'll be very brief, just to and thanking everyone. It's been a very inspiring discussion and very inspiring panel, and thank you very much, especially to our friends and partners, Getrude and Nakibuuka, for your contributions. And I think with your presentations, we really see how this approach comes to life, and we understand exactly what we are talking about. Yes, maybe in a few words, just to say that we do have, we are continuing at IDLO to work towards further applying this the legal empowerment and social elements of the legal empowerment and social accountability approach. For example, in Tunisia, we have a project that works to improve women's access to justice at the local level into governorates of Tunis and KEF. We are still working on this, and we'll be probably ready to share more in a further discussion. But we see how particularly legal empowerment, for example, approaches, but also social accountability have had to be adapted, and we've had to adapt to the COVID-19 crisis. So digital outreach, and in this case, outreach of beneficiaries was done with the aid of phones, in fact. So the legal aid providers that we are working with in IDLO itself has increased its outreach with the aid of phones, because the now in-person meetings are much more difficult, and meetings are much more difficult to organize. That's it, and interested to hear from our colleagues.
Great, thank you very much, Reluka, and sorry I mixed you up with Samira. So now I would like to give Samira the opportunity to give her intervention, and sorry about that.
It's okay. Thank you, Zainab. My question, I also mentioned in the chat that those people who actually threaten the families to keep quiet on what has happened to the victim. And what does, if in your organization, if you have faced such issues, so how do you tackle that issue? Because it's not only the victim, now it's the family who is actually facing the threats from the opposite party.
Great. Thank you. So I would like to now give the opportunity to each of our panelists to react to Raluca's comment and then respond to Samira's question based on their experiences integrating the LESA approach and applying it within their work. So in no particular order, whoever would like to go first.
Maybe just a general comment, then I will leave the floor to my colleagues who actually implemented the project, but a comment related to Samira's question. This was not an issue that IDLO faced directly in implementing the project, but what I've seen from the research study findings is that of course, the target group in this instance was particularly vulnerable, and it included victims of gender-based violence. And so what was fundamental, I think, is that the project from the start was designed in a way as to allow for continuous collection of feedback from the beneficiaries, so from the girls and women who brought issues related to the activities to the implementing partners. And so through an adaptive approach, the issues were addressed. And so issues included girls that were not able to speak out directly about their cases of GBV. And this is why the peer-to-peer outreach approach was adopted. So girls that had been working with the implementing partners already in prior activities had been identified to have this role of intermediary to speak with, to collect cases of GBV and to report them to the implementing partners. And so this was fundamental. Also, through collecting continuous feedback on the activities, some issues were identified in the course of project implementation. And so, for example, I think some of the radio channels that were being used in one of the districts for awareness raising activities, they were speaking about gender-based violence in a way that was not sensitive and was potentially adding a risk of stigma. And this was something that was reported and was addressed in the course of project implementation. And awareness raising activities were tailored to the needs of the girls that reported the issues. But I think Belice or other colleagues can speak more in detail about this.
Thank you, Raffaella. I will leave the question about victimization of families and girls to Nakibuuka to address, because her organization dealt with such a case. But what I really wanted to highlight, I can see a question in the chat around people preferring tangible products, those that empower them as opposed to trainings and something that they don't see immediately, which was identified as a challenge in the project. How we addressed that, like I said when I did my presentation, this particular project was part of the larger Dreams project, and what we did is that for the adolescent girls and young women that we worked with in this particular project, we also linked them to other Dreams partners who are doing economic empowerment projects. So they not only got information about their rights and how to hold duty bearers accountable, but they were also able to be part of projects that empowered them economically. Then another thing that I would like to address is about how did we ensure that everyone was part part of the process. Everyone in the community was part of the process. One, both SEHUD and LHRC conducted community legal awareness sessions where they provided legal aid services, where they provided information on the law and how to access legal and justice services, and where to go when they needed either legal help or any other help related to HIV prevention or gender-based violence. Secondly, the community meetings that we held when we did the community scorecard were done within the community, either at the local health facility or at a community hall, and they were actually open to all community members to attend. In that way, we were able to get all members of the community who were available to take part in the process and also take part in discussions with their duty bearers. One thing that was really positive about this whole process is that we had duty bearers attending sessions within the community. So their local police commandant, the local healthcare worker, and the local magistrate attending a meeting with the community members to discuss issues that affected the community. For us, that was a plus because community members, some of the feedback they gave us was that they never have these opportunities because, for instance, they say that they are intimidated to go to court, so they don't go to court. But they had an opportunity where the magistrates sat with them at a community meeting and they were able to give feedback. The local prosecutor also was in that meeting and they were able to provide such feedback. And for having those meetings at the community, again, speaks to our plan for sustainability, because once you do these, these two groups meet and forge a relationship, in future they are then able to continue with that relationship, even as organizations who work with them, even as we move away at the end of the project. So I will give it over to Nakibuuka to speak to some of the issues around.
Thank you, Belice. And before we hand over to Nakibuuka, I have been told by the organizers that we are now at the end of our session. So Nakibuuka, but I do want to give you the opportunity to react. So maybe you could combine that with your closing remarks for the session, and then we can go back to the other panelists to also give their closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. To people that have interacted with the survivors of gender-based violence, one of the things that we really think about is their protection, especially that when they report the cases, they are kind of victimized within the communities. So as an institution, we work with organizations that provide services, shelter to such girls. So once we identify the girls that are abused and who are willing to take on their cases, one of the things we do is to protect them. Just to let the participants know that Uganda does not have a one-stop center or shelter that is facilitated fully by the government. So most of these shelters are private owned. But because we still waiting for the government, of course, we have sued it to put up shelters. We do not want to see the victims or survivors of violence in the communities having that double stigma. So one of the things that we do is to pull them out of the communities and place them in the centers where they have protection as they take on their cases. So that is how we deal with that. I think at the moment we have more than 3 in the shelters, and simply because they need that particular protection. So thank you on that question. Kindly allow me thank IDLO for organizing this, and for thanking all the participants for their time to come and listen in. As an organization, we still stand by our mission and vision, and we shall always use the law to ensure that rights are protected in Uganda and the East African level. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Nakibuuka, and thank you to all of our participants and especially our panelists. I would like to highlight again that IDLO has launched its Lessons Learned Briefed, and this will be available to the public on the 20th of October. So you can read about our experiences implementing the integrated LESA approach in the Dreams Challenge that our panelists have also highlighted. You can still access the briefs with the link that was shared in the chat earlier. And Before we leave, I have been asked by the organizers to invite you all to turn on your videos so we can shift to a gallery view and take stock of the great room and the diverse participation that has joined us into this session. Great. So as we can see, don't be shy. Turn on your, if you're comfortable, please do turn on your videos. Great. All right. Great. So thank you so much again to everybody. And thank you for engaging discussion in person and on the Jamboard. And let's keep the conversation going. And thank you. And this has been a great 2 days at the Knowledge Platform Conference. And now I believe that you can join the closing ceremony as well. So thank you, everybody, and goodbye.